Good morning, everyone. We have the most important people in this room with us as our revisor and our staff, so we are ready to go. And our AV guy, and as always, our trusted and well-worked CA, Don Ola. So we appreciate it. Without these guys, we'd be a mess and not organized at all. So we appreciate everything that they do. Welcome to the committee. We are now in order. Our meeting's called to order, so we will jump right into it. The first thing on our agenda is we're going to have a hearing on Senate Bill 373, making appropriations to the University of Kansas Medical Center for fiscal year 2022 for conducting COVID-19 clinical trials at the Midwest Stem Cell Therapy Center. And with the revisor's office to give a bill overview is Jenna Moyer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, members of the committee. Senate Bill 373 would make an appropriation, which is not something that we typically do in this bill, but that appropriation would be for $500,000 for the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2022, in the amount of $500,000 for the purposes of conducting COVID-19 trials developed at the Midwest Stem Cell Therapy Center, and that if that expenditure is not used by the end of the fiscal year, June 30th, 2022, then that amount would be lapsed, and this would take effect in the Kansas Register.
Jenna, thank you for that overview. Committee, do we have questions on the bill? Not seeing any. We will move right into proponent testimony. And proponent or anybody testifying today on these two bills that we have hearings on, if you could please keep your testimony to under 5 minutes, that would be greatly appreciative. Our first proponent is our very own Senator Mike Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, members of the committee. You have my written testimony. I'm probably going to go off script just a little bit on this. I am on the Midwest Stem Cell Therapy Center board, and I stand in strong support of this bill. They do some very important work and have been doing it for quite some time. A lot of times around here we'll hand out money to people and we don't know that there's going to be the work done. We don't know that they're capable of doing the work. In this case, the Stem Cell Therapy Center has been doing this work and has proven they can do this work, and this is vital funding that's necessary to further their studies on cytokine storm, which is an inflammatory disease. They've primarily been focused in the past on graft versus host disease. So when transplant patients get a transplant, their body doesn't recognize that, and of course they attack their immune system attacks their own body. But their work helps to quiet those storms of inflammation, and they've seen how this can translate to the most severe COVID patients because most of the severe COVID patients have suffered from extreme inflammation that gets out of control, and that's what kills a lot of these people. And this study is ready for phase 2 trials. I won't go into the technical details because I want Dr. Prentice and Dr. Shirley to fill you in on the more detail of this, but the need is there. They've been asking for this money for some time because they've got these studies queued up, and they are here in Kansas. They are unique to any place in the country on studies of this type. And so we have a chance to be not only a shining star in this research realm, but also this is groundbreaking therapies that I think will be very, very helpful. And, you know, as they succeed in this, we'll bring more and more to Kansas. More and more research to Kansas, and this will also help them to gain funding from the NIH so they can expand their studies. I won't go into details, but I just wanted to stand in strong support of Senate Bill 373. I feel this is something that's absolutely necessary, and we felt like this was the best way to do it. We attempted to get it through a budget resolution last year and failed, but I think that highlighting the work that they're doing is so important. So I will finish up so the other doctors can talk, and thank you for your support of Senate Bill 373, Committee. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator, thank you for your testimony. In committee, we will hold questions until all proponents have had an opportunity to speak. Our next proponent is David Prentice, PhD for the MSTC Advisory Board.
Thank you,
David,
Mr.
welcome to the
Chairman.
committee.
Distinguished senators, I'm a cell and developmental biologist with over 40 years' experience, including federally funded lab research, both academic and government labs in a lot of different areas. I'm also a fifth-generation Kansan. I'm proud to be so. Most relevant today, I currently serve as the chair of the advisory board for the Midwest Stem Cell Therapy Center, and yeah, that's a mouthful, so I'll probably just say MSCTC or the center from now on. I know some of you have been around since the inception of the center, but a number haven't. So just to give you a little historical perspective, the center was established by the legislature in 2013. But until that time, there had not been any sort of comprehensive center to focus on adult stem cell therapies, bringing these things to patients in Kansas or even in the surrounding region, even though there had been scientific evidence of the efficacy of adult stem cells to treat patients for lots of different conditions for over a decade before that time. The goals of the center, as put into statute, all focus on the patients, whether that's developing new types of therapies, bringing those therapies to the patients in various clinics, educating physicians on how to leverage those therapies, and so on. The legislature provides an annual budget of roughly $730,000, $750,000, somewhere in that span, which primarily goes to staffing, maintenance, and some seed money to start various preclinical studies. Well, since 2013, the center has developed a large number of potential therapies using adult stem cells, and I won't go through the list now, but even our advisory board has been amazed when the director of the center comes to our advisory board meeting and starts down this long list of, yeah, we're looking at treating this, treating that, and so on. Many are still at the preclinical stage, but a number have moved into clinical trials. And in particular, I want to focus on one that Senator Thompson mentioned, using adult stem cells and a particular type of adult stem cell called mesenchymal stem cell, MSC for short, from the solid part of the umbilical cord. So this is not the cord blood. This is from the solid part of the cord, what some practitioners call Orton's jelly. It turns out these particular types of adult stem cells are able to calm that cytokine storm that Senator Thompson was referencing. In particular, the trial they did was for graft versus host disease. Somebody gets a bone marrow transplant, a stem cell transplant for a particular type of cancer. Graft versus host, it's when there's some sort of mismatch and frankly the graft, the transplant, attacks your own body, considers it foreign. It's a life-threatening condition. Well, what researchers at the center found out and actually did a phase 1 trial on was that these cells from the umbilical cord could calm that storm, could save lives, literally. So they've already shown safety as well as the initial efficacy for using these particular types of adult stem cells for patient therapies. It just so happens that for patients who have the most severe cases of COVID-19, what really ends up putting them onto that sort of respirator, the respiratory distress, is the same kind of problem that you see in graft versus host. It's that cytokine storm, where essentially the cells, our own immune system now, goes into overdrive and starts to destroy tissue, lung tissue, and other types of tissue. Given that, and given that they've already shown safety and efficacy for this type of adult stem cell therapy, it would be natural to go ahead and do a clinical trial to treat these patients with the most severe conditions. There's nothing available to help these patients. Once they get to that point in time, you put them on the ventilator and pray. And so what the advisory board, frankly, thought of was bringing this to the legislature a one-time $500,000 allocation specifically for this type of clinical trial to try and treat these most severe patients, already having the proof of principle that this should work, and there being nothing else you can do for these particular patients. So again, the cost, phase 1 clinical trial, small phase 1 trial, 10 patients, $500,000. And I'll yield now to Dr. Shirley.
Thank you, David. And committee, our next proponent is Dr. Shirley with the MSTC Advisory Board. Dr. Shirley, welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning. Good morning, committee members. I'm here to provide testimony in support of Senate Bill 373 in my capacity as an active two-term member of the Advisory Board of the University of Kansas Midwest Stem Cell Therapy Center. Just in a way of a little bit of background about who I am, I'm an MD, PhD trained physician scientist with 30 years of experience leading academic and commercial research programs in cancer research and stem cell research and development. Currently, I lead a company called Asymmetrics LLC. It's an adult stem cell biotechnology company. I'm the president and CEO. Asymmetrics is known for developing the first technology for determining the dosage of therapeutic adult stem cells. During my now 2 years of service on the advisory board of the University of Kansas Midwest Stem Cell Therapy Center, I've become familiar with the center's mission, leadership, excellent operations, and outstanding past progress. Under Dr. Sunil Abhyankar's vibrant directorship, the center has accomplished many of its research development and clinical goals. Of particular relevance to this hearing is the successful development of an effective FDA-certified good manufacturing practice, good tissue practice, adult stem cell manufacturing facility. There are not many centers like this one in this nation. The Midwest Stem Cell Therapy Center has achieved challenging milestones for regulatory compliance and certification, production of clinical grade manufactured adult stem cells, and the supply and implementation of those manufactured stem cells in successful phase 1 clinical trials. By any measure, this is remarkable progress and assures continued future achievements. Your approval of Senate Bill 373 is important for maintaining the current momentum of this valuable clinical research and development center and resource. This allocation would allow the Midwest Stem Cell Therapy Center to continue forward with plans to evaluate their manufactured stem cells, adult stem cells, for their effectiveness in treating debilitating lung inflammation associated with severe COVID-19 infection. The advisory board enthusiastically endorses this plan. As you have heard from Dr. Prentice's testimony, one of the current leading clinical evaluations of the type of stem cells manufactured by the center's facility is for reducing or preventing destructive tissue and organ inflammation that is a clinical feature of many devastating disease states, including cancer treatments. Inflammation is that cytokine storm that Dr. Prentice described. Therefore, supporting the continued progress of the Midwest Stem Cell Therapy Center toward clinical trials to evaluate the effectiveness of their manufactured adult stem cells in reducing COVID-19 lung inflammation has other farther-reaching potential medical benefits. I want to close by noting that I'm from Massachusetts, not from Kansas, though that would be okay too. And my extended family is in Tennessee. And I want to note this to emphasize that the work that this center is doing is not only going to impact health in Kansas, it impacts the greater nation and the world. I've been engaged in stem cell research and medicine for more than 30 years, working toward this vision that this remarkable therapeutic approach could become more effective in ending pain and suffering for patients with many different illnesses and ailments, including aging. And this center at the University of Kansas is making a high impact essential contributions to achieving this vision. So I hope you will continue to move them forward by approving this bill. I want to thank you for your attention, and I'm available later for questions. Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you, Dr. Shirley. Committee, this does conclude our proponent testimony. We are now open for questions for any of the proponents. Senator Stephan.
Thank you. What an important conversation to have today. It was wonderful. We've got to quit thinking about people having COVID, and we've got to start thinking of what phase of COVID they have. There's early, there's middle, and there's late. And with Senate Bill 381, we heard previously, we got into the early treatment. And not even as we develop and use the generics in early, we're still going to have people that move on to the phase 2, the inflammatory stage, when we start to destroy the organs, particularly the lungs. And so to have novel treatment or investigate novel treatment, that's what American healthcare has done for decades, if not centuries. And so I applaud your efforts. I applaud the opportunity to educate people on the disease and the disease process so they can start looking at it differently, understanding it, realizing how to treat it. And we've spent, $18 million on a propaganda campaign pushing a vaccine solely. This is where you spend real money to make real progress. And if that provoked any statements you'd like to make, please do. Thank you.
Senator O'Shea.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was curious if this is being studied in other states, or are there is there other research being conducted with this already outside of Kansas, outside of this scenario? Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. There are a few other places around the world.
If I could, whenever you answer a question, I apologize. If you would restate your name and who you represent before you answer the question. Thank you.
Dr. David Prentice with the Stem Cell Center Advisory Board. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator O'Shea, yes, there are some other places around the world that are investigating this. Frankly, there were 2 papers published just this past fall, very early reports that looked like there might be, again, the potential, just as we've seen here at the Kansas Center. Both of those reports were from China. There's frankly no place else in the U.S. that is even directly addressing this particular issue and trying to develop the therapies. Kansas, again, a lot of people I know kind of say, this little tiny state here in the center of the country, fly over land. Kansas is at the leading edge in terms of this and a number of other potential adult stem cell therapies. I really see this as a great investment for Kansas to make. You've already seen a good return on that investment in terms of a number of the things that have come out of the center so far. This looks like another great opportunity, and again, to help patients for which at this time there's no particular therapy that can affect them.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And this is maybe a question for you about process. Can you tell me a little bit more why, because this appears to be a request for state general fund dollars. So is there a reason it's in the bill form versus going to Ways and Means, or can you help a new senator understand that? Thank you.
All appropriations are in bill form. Everything we do is in bill form. And why it is here, the Senate President, that's where he referred it to. So, Senator Petty.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We have a little mic issue going on here. This is a question for Dr. Shirley. Dr. Shirley, I appreciate you being here today, and I know you are on the advisory board, but tell me the role of the advisory board.
James Shirley, University of Kansas Midwest Stem Cell Therapy Center. The short answer is to give advice about process, about operations, about interactions outside of that center. Sometimes we do things as detail. In my case, my expertise is in expanding adult stem cells. So I hear from them the work they're doing and who they're working with. I make recommendations for how to proceed with that. And we give them feedback. So we review what they're doing. So it allows us to get really intimate with what's happening, but there's also a broader perspective that we bring. Just to give you an example, Senator, I'm a member of a group called the Advanced Regenerative Manufacturing Institute. It's a nationwide organization that's working toward this problem of producing therapeutic stem cells. And so there's a big consortium there. As an advisory board member, I can interact that group with the Stem Cell Center. So it's a lot of different roles that we play. And I'll just say, as a scientist and as a physician, it's just been a real thrill to see the excellence in this center and the vision that it has. I hope that was an answer to your question.
That's helpful. But as an advisory board, you mentioned they bring stuff to you, they being
The center director, the scientist.
okay. And so for any kind of a stem cell research to occur, there is a process that has to go through. Would that be correct?
Yes.
So we did receive as neutral testimony that this is not, this proposal that you're talking about, that's in Senate Bill 373, has not received U.S. Food and Drug Administration approval. So that itself takes time as well, doesn't it?
So this is a part of the process to get there. So there's this first study that's been done with these cells, and now what they're asking to do is to be able to do that first phase 1 study that moves you on to the FDA process, and if the trial shows efficacy, moves you onward toward approval. But so the advisory board is a part of that as well, advising that process. But those are fairly standard procedures that one follows to be able to get to that point.
But that process takes time as well.
Yes.
And
Yeah,
that-
research takes time.
Has that begun? Because according to the director of the Midwest Stem Cell Therapy Center, that process hasn't begun.
So there has been foundation laid because the center has developed processes for producing the therapeutic cells. It is a major step. But the next step requires money. And so that next step is to move on to developing and getting interactions with the FDA to do those next phase 1 clinical trials.
And are there patients in line right now for a trial study?
So not for this specific trial, but I've asked this as an advisory board member. That's an important question. Is there going to be anyone to go into this trial? And there are hundreds of patients who need this. And so from that group, there will be the usual kind of accrual process to get informed and sent, informed patients, physicians, and doctors. All of that process is what this bill will support.
But that process takes time. I mean, my daughter works in stem cell, I mean, not in stem cell, but a trial study. So I know that process takes time to be able to locate and also process those patients.
Yeah, and one of the things that the advisory board does is to help with trying to accelerate that process. But yeah, this is research, it will take time, yeah.
Okay, Senator Erickson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate you all being here. I find this extremely exciting as someone who's lost one parent to liver failure and one to stroke. I find it very encouraging that maybe going forward we'll find some relief for those issues. My question is for either one who would like to address it. I noticed you mentioned several times non-embryonic stem cells are being used in this process. Can you speak to the assurance that it will continue to be non-embryonic stem cells? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Dr. David Prentice with the Stem Cell Advisory Board. Mr. Chairman, Senator Erickson, as part of statute for the Midwest Stem Cell Therapy Center, they are precluded from using embryonic stem cells or fetal tissues. So that was in place from the start, from the inception of the center. This is totally directed towards these adult-type stem cells that they're producing from the solid part of the umbilical cord, and have already shown the proof of principle with graft versus host.
Thank you so much for that clarification. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Committee, I do not see any further. Senator Gossage.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Prentice, if you could come up, Dr. Prentice. Thank you. I read the same testimony that Senator Petty had mentioned. And I'm wondering, have the two parties come together to talk about how these funds could be used? I realize that the neutral testimony has not come up yet. I guess it's written only. But it does seem to conflict. Could you address that? Have you seen that testimony?
I have not, Senator. Dr. David Prentice, Stem Cell Center Advisory Board. I have not seen the neutral testimony that you're referring to. As Dr. Shirley already noted, there is a process. It's already involved. Part of that has been a shortcut because of the previous study with graft versus host. And so the advisory board's understanding is that the center had already gotten FDA approval, of course, for the graft versus host trial. They're working now on the phase 2 aspects of that. And the FDA told the center that essentially using those same kinds of cells in the same type of procedure would shorten the amount of time it would take to get approval for a new type of study, a new clinical trial. That will still take time. They still have to be able to have the money before then they can come to the FDA and say, hey, we're ready to do this, and here's the protocol.
Mr. Chair, will not read, it's the very short testimony, but I won't read it today, but I would like to see the proponents take a look at the neutral testimony. Senator Thompson would have a copy of that, and then come back to us about, or let us know how you feel about that. And they're saying they can't spend the funds, et cetera. They won't be able to spend it in time. They must have FDA before they start the trials, et cetera. That being said, I do want to say how excited I am about this adult stem cell research. And I happened to be at a conference over this past year, very exciting videos of what it's doing for children. Mm-hmm. And children who had severe cases, and that stem cell research was the answer, and seeing them start to behave like normal children with no hope is absolutely incredible. So thank you for everything that you all are doing, and thank you, Mr. Chair.
Committee, we are running short on time on this hearing. We do have another hearing after that, so we have 2 more questions. If you could please make it brief. Senator Thompson and Senator Holscher.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Actually, I just wanted to clarify, I was looking at the neutral testimony, and these people work, the director of the Stem Cell Center, Dr. Abianker and Dr. Samari, and they're concerned the only reason they're neutral is about the date, and we may have to amend the date so that they can spend the money. When we originally drafted this bill, the thought was that we needed to get the money to them as fast as possible by the end of this fiscal year. So we may have to work with them on an amendment to make sure that money extends into the next fiscal year so that they don't have this immediate deadline so they can go forward with that. So that's really the only reason they were neutral. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Holscher.
Yeah, actually, my question was along those lines. Thank you, Mr. Chair, because the bill does say June 30th, 2022, and that does seem kind of prohibitive in terms of doing a clinical trial. Thank you.
Thank you. And this does conclude our proponent testimony. And as you've already heard, there is neutral written only by Dr. Samari and Sunil Akmar with the MSTC. And committee, you also have in your front of you, you should have the Midwest Stem Cell Therapy Center 2022 annual report. We have no opponents listed. Making sure we did not leave anybody out. Was there somebody that was supposed to be an opponent? Okay. Not seeing any. We are closing the hearing on Senate Bill 373, and we are now opening the hearing on Senate Bill 441. And to give a bill overview with the Revisor's Office, Jenna Moyer.
Thank you again, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Senate Bill 441 enacts the Biological Laboratory Accident Transparency Act, which requires institutions and organizations to report accidents and near-miss accidents at high-risk biological laboratories. And to sort of get the scope of this bill, I'll go over definitions first. A high-risk biological laboratory is a commercial or research facility that engages in research that involves human pathogens or that grows or manipulates any of the pathogens listed in the NIAID, which is the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, on their list of priority and emergency infectious diseases, which includes things like anthrax, botulism, tularemia, viral hemorrhagic fevers, just a lot of very highly transmissible, dangerous diseases. And a laboratory accident is an event that leads to an injury where skin is broken, or another injury to a human or damage to an individual, where you need a spill kit, where there's a biosafety containment failure, where any specimens that could be infectious, including lab animals, are lost, missing, or stolen, and where infections or seropositives, which are detectable antibodies, are detected. And Section 3 goes into the reporting requirements. So if a lab accident or a near-miss accident occurs in any of those labs, then that institution is required to report that in a summary format. And the report of that accident would include a list, or the date of the accident, the date of the report, the lab or site where it was detected, a description of the accident, a listing of any of the pathogens involved, and the number of individuals affected, a summary of suspected or known secondary exposures, and the type and size of the lab, and approximate number of person-hours spent in the lab each year. The bill goes on at the end of page 2, at the top of page 3, to specify that the reports should not contain certain information that would identify non-public security measures or anything else that would give away the identity of a person or violate other law. And if there's a failure to report the requirements of this section, the additional information should be noted in that report. There's also a provision in subsection E of section 3, that prohibits an employer taking adverse employment actions, things like firing, retaliating, demoting, harassing any employee who discloses information that they in good faith believe that should have been reported, or assisting with any investigation into violation of this act. And that employer could be required to rehire that person, as well as pay damages, and be ordered to reinstate the employee and enjoin from further violations of this section. And I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Jenna. Questions, committee? Senator Petty.
Jenna, on that section that you just referred to, letter E, with the employer, so that's just a one-way street. It's just the employer. And if the employee is providing fraudulent information, is there any repercussion in this bill for that?
If they're
Employer E who works in this.
or giving that information to whom?
Well, this says,
Like in a report?
well, this section says, no employer shall discharge, demote, harass, retaliate, or take any adverse action against an employee because of such employee's acts made in good faith under this act. So, it sounds to me like if I'm an employee and I'm a disgruntled employee in this situation, and I put out false information, how does that work within this bill?
Okay, so I'm just gonna
Employee.
clarify the scope of your question. If you're putting out that false information, this would typically be known as a whistleblower provision. So if you're putting out that false information as a disgruntled employee, the employee would not be protected under this. Now, if you were putting out false information in a report that's supposed to be disclosed under this, that's a different can of worms. Does that make sense?
So the whistleblower who's providing false information is not protected under this section.
That employee would not be acting in good faith if they're leaking something to the media that's false and inflammatory to get back at an employer. Yeah, that would not be covered.
Okay.
Senator Baumgartner.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the explanation. Want to clarify, this would also include our colleges and universities?
Yes, a high-risk biological laboratory, it's part of that definition. It's a commercial or research facility, and it would include, yes.
Wonderful. Thank you very much.
Seeing no further questions, Jenna, thank you. Committee will now turn our attention to proponent testimony. We have one, Dr. David Mannheim, lead researcher at One Day Sooner. Dr. Mannheim is with us virtually. Welcome to the committee. Dr. Mannheim, are you with us?
Apologies. Yes, can you hear this? Can you hear me?
We can now, thank you.
Okay, apologies. Thank you, Chairman and members of the committee, for the opportunity to testify today about this important effort to promote public health and safety in Kansas and around the world. As the prevention of the spread of now suppressed novel diseases like SARS, MERS, and Zika has shown, laboratories investigating infectious diseases, as well as clinical laboratories, clinical research and testing are critical. The rapid creation of the COVID-19 vaccines by Donald Trump's Operation Warp Speed shows that this sort of biological research is critical for response as well. At the same time, in the United States, there were over 50 human-caused high-risk pathogen laboratory exposures and infections, which my published research has documented occurring between 1975 and 2016. And even worse accidents are obviously possible. The still unclear possibility that COVID-19 initially escaped from a laboratory overseas shows that certain types of laboratory work comes with potentially devastating risks. With the approaching opening of the National Bio and Agro Defense Facility in Manhattan, this bill could not be more timely. The work they have been doing on promoting laboratory safety and high reliability organization approaches will put them in Kansas among the best in the world at laboratory safety. The facility will also allow the United States to ensure such work is done domestically, instead of at overseas laboratories which currently do this type of biological research in Australia, Germany, or China. The CDC's Biosafety in Microbiological and Biomedical Laboratories, 6th edition, notes that publication of the occurrence of laboratory-acquired infections provides an invaluable resource for the microbiological and biomedical community. But few laboratories routinely and publicly report on these events. In the United States, the only such facility that does so is the Galveston National Laboratory in Texas, which has exactly the sort of reporting this bill suggests on their public website. Instead, for most labs, there are long delayed and non-public reports sent to the CDC or Congress. Of course, reporting is just one of a number of necessary ingredients in improving laboratory safety, but for the types of high security laboratories that this bill applies to, it is of great value to biosafety work in understanding and continuing to improve biosafety at that and other facilities. The labs included in this bill, which include BSL 3 and 4 labs like those at NBAF, but also lower biosecurity BSL 2 labs that deal with pathogens that are still very concerning, like anthrax. And for other laboratories, the bill allows similar reporting in case universities or other laboratories want to go above and beyond what's necessary. And by allowing for flexibility on the part of laboratories to use the type of internal reporting that biosafety officers are told are necessary across all laboratories dealing with human pathogens, this legislation balances the need for transparency with minimizing the burden on laboratories doing this important work. I'm confident that laboratories in the United States are already among the safest in the world for doing research, but by pushing for greater transparency with this bill, this can be made clearer to the public and to the world, and Kansas can set an example for the country and for the rest of the world. Thank you for your time.
Dr. Mannheim, we appreciate it. You are the only proponent, and people would be disappointed with me if I did not make this reference to Mannheim Steamroller, so I made it so everybody can be at ease now. So, committee, do we have any questions for Dr. Mannheim? Senator Petty.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Dr. Mannheim, thank you for testifying, but could you please identify where you are? And I don't know anything about One Day Sooner.
Yeah, so I'm currently a guest researcher at the Technion in Israel. And One Day Sooner is an advocacy organization working on speeding up responses to pandemics, in part by advocating for human challenge trials and other methods for speeding up response to outbreaks.
So did you say Israel? And is that where you're
Yes.
at this time? Thank you.
I'm currently in Israel, yes. I grew up in
Yeah.
Atlanta, but I'm
Okay, so no connection with Kansas, I take it.
no.
Thank you.
Okay, I do not see any further questions for proponent. I do now. Senator Gossage.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm looking at and have read the opponent's testimony, and thank you for your proponent. And I think we would all agree that any type of a pathogen or dangerous biological high-risk lab, anything escaping from a lab that could harm us, I'll phrase it that way, is very scary for a lot of people. I've heard the conversations about oversight and reporting, et cetera. In the opponent's testimony, they are saying that this is duplication of effort. There have been multiple complementary, using their words, sometimes overlapping efforts that they must report to the Federal Select Agent Program and other state regulators, including Department of Agriculture. What can you say to that for us?
Thank you for the question. Yeah, there are other reporting requirements. I think that in most cases, the overlapping requirements where they exist simply require that they make the reports that they already are required to make public. But most of the reporting that occurs is long delayed, well after the point where anything can be done about a lab accident. They're also very much non-public, so that Freedom of Information Act requests have been filed, and it takes, as I'm sure people are aware, months or years to get access to what it is that happened. And many or most labs aren't covered under the Federal Select Agent Program. So labs doing research into, as I mentioned before, anthrax aren't necessarily covered. So somebody could spill anthrax in a way that happened in Russia and led to a large event in the 1970s, and nobody would need to be notified, which frankly is horrifying. So I think that, yes, there is a place where this duplicates other requirements, but I also think that in places where it does, it's minimal extra work, and there are a lot of things that aren't otherwise covered.
And one follow-up, if I may, Mr. Chair, is that they seem to indicate that there's not clear guidance on which laboratories would be required to report, where the report should be made, how often. Is the report anonymous? It mentioned it should be placed on a website within a few days of the accident. I'm all for that, but can you clarify as to which website?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think the model of GNL in Texas, I think is an appropriate one where universities can put this on their website, or as the bill says, if they don't have a website already, they can provide the list on request. But the goal is that organizations that already have their own websites, labs, university labs certainly, have their own sites where they present all of their research. It's appropriate for them to be also linking to their safety records. In terms of the lack of clarity, I think that the bill here suggests that people, these labs should be reporting in a way that's not intended to be overly burdensome and is flexible. If they need more guidance for that, they can certainly copy the example of other laboratories. They can copy the example of GNL. They can copy the example of what they already report to the Select Agents Program. And any of those would certainly qualify for the bill, for what the bill requires.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Seeing any further questions, thank you, Dr. Mannheim. That does conclude our proponents. We do not have any written testimony on proponents. We do have written only on opponent, David Rosowski and Cheryl Durer, KSU Office of the VP for Research. And we do have one neutral conferee, Myron Gonzalez, Director of KDHE Lab. Myron, and if you wouldn't mind, and I apologize, we are getting really low on time. If you could keep it really brief and to the point, that would be appreciative. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And good morning, committee members. Thank you for the opportunity to offer a brief neutral testimony on the Transparency Act that's before you. My name is Myron Gonzalez. I'm the Laboratory Director for the Kansas Department of Health and Environment Laboratories, or the Office of Laboratory Services as it's noted in statute. As many of you are probably aware, our laboratory does operate a BSL-3 laboratory in response and support of the Homeland Security and various other agencies and facilities around Kansas, as well as part of the national network, to offer expertise in biological agents that may be used for terrorism or are severe pathogens or highly infectious pathogens. We do not do research on these pathogens. It's more of an identification and confirmations. Consequently, the Transparency Act will impact the operations of our facility. The reporting required by this bill, as has already been mentioned, is duplicative because of the reporting requirements that are already upon our lab as part of the Select Agent Program with the CDC. The bill also requires facilities such as ours to establish a website, or I guess, as I just heard, perhaps a list for public indexing. The cost of a website of the nature that was described has been provided to you in our financial fiscal note. Another impact of the bill would be the reporting of all accidents, incidents, really, regardless of whether they are associated with any biological risk or exposure. The use of any sort of spill kit. There may be no pathogens in the lab at all, but if you spilled a little bit of your reagent and you had to wipe it up, even though everything else is already put away, you'd still need to be reporting. I think this is some of the things that needs to be considered when thinking about how to report, and reporting such that it means something. I recognize the need for reporting and being transparent, but also the need for being clear so that it's understandable. And with that, I'll stand for questions.
Myron, thank you. Senator Thompson?
Yeah, actually for Myron, thank you, Myron, for being here. Is there any central repository of data of this type in the nation where you can go to one spot and see? I mean, I'm thinking back about what's happened in the last 2 years and the lack of transparency from the NIH and the NIAID about what happened to the Wuhan lab and all this stuff, and we're just now learning or confirming what we suspected a long time. Do you see a need for that?
I don't know that even this bill, my understanding, would not be a central repository. I'm not sure if there is a central repository other than the Select Agent Program, which is a federal program that all BSL-3 or all Select Agent labs in the United States, both agricultural and research, have to report to, is the only one I'm aware of.
And given the fact that there's one of these laboratories in Kansas, don't you, I guess what I'm trying to get at here is it seems to me that transparency is a good thing, and you can learn from particularly hazardous spills, maybe not the frivolous or the small scale stuff, but the bigger stuff, to protect the public's health and safety. Any comments on that?
I would, as has been noted, we're pretty much neutral on the bill, but certainly there is a benefit from a scientific standpoint as a scientist to always learn from what we've done in the past. Our goal is always to do that. So yes, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Erickson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a real quick question, and I read this testimony previously, so I don't know if it's refers specifically to yours or not, but it mentioned, I know we talk a lot about the safety as far as leaks or accidents, but it mentioned in there that theft is something that's reported. Is theft in these labs a common occurrence or a problem?
I don't know that, this is Myron Gonzalez with KDHE. I'm not sure that it is a common problem. I know that it is something that we train our staff on every single year. We're required to train on potential insider threats, potential threats from the outside, potential ways of losing things. We have to do certain indexing on a regular basis. These are all things that are required as part of our federal program to protect. Theft would be a way for something to escape. So it has to be listed, but I'm not aware of, at least in our laboratories, we're pretty strict and have, multiple barriers that would prevent anything like that.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Okay, committee, I do not see any further questions for the neutral conferee. This will conclude the hearing on Senate Bill 441. We have a couple of minutes. We did hear Senate Bill 425 the other day. There is an amendment. If you remember, this was the Ed Clump and DCF with law enforcement, DCF communicating. Jenna, can you just give a quick, brief update on what the bill is, please?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Senate Bill 425, if we're taking that up for final action, relates to information sharing between DCF and law enforcement. And it would add just certain investigative records to be shared between those agencies.
And we are going to try to do final action in 2 minutes, if that's okay. We do have an amendment. If you recall, Ed Clump and DCF had talked about this amendment. There was a bill in the House that was similar that this amendment was put on. So we will hand that out real quick. Has everyone had an opportunity to review the amendment? Okay. I will make a motion that we adopt this amendment. Second by Senator Thompson. Any discussion on this motion? Not seeing any. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. Or not same sign, no. So ayes have it. That motion amendment is adopted. Committee, what's your pleasure of the bill? Senator Baumgardner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move we pass that Senate Bill 425 as amended favorably for passage.
I have a motion on the floor by Senator Baumgardner, a second by Senator Thompson to pass out Senate Bill number 425 as amended favorably for passage. Any discussion on this motion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. This bill is going to the floor. Thank you, everybody. We are adjourned. Oops, just a second. Well, before we adjourn, we have a
Very quickly.
Senator Baumgardner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I know that the request had been made last week when we passed out the bill that had to do with making sure there was no discrimination against individuals that were blind from adopting or maintaining custody of their children. And we talked, and I committed to working with our revisor to include those that had other disabilities. In working with the revisor, it would be a massive amendment that would impact every section of the bill. So it is my hope that we pass it out of the Senate, and that when it gets to the House, that would be the appropriate time for the individual that had requested that amendment, that work with that, and then we can come together, hopefully in conference committee, to get that taken care of. But just felt that the committee needed that update.
Senator Baumgardner, thank you for that update. Committee, anything else before we adjourn? Okay, we are adjourned. Thank you.